it'll be posted up on our YouTube channel. Get rid of the transcripts. I don't know about you, but I don't like that transcript feature on Teams. It's helpful. So we're doing this workshop, right? And Bob Ward and Buck Woody and Anna Hoffman and my inside of Microsoft have been doing a lot, making sure there's a lot of content about SQL Server 22. I know that Bob Ward and Buck Woody, two product group ish members here in Microsoft for SQL Server, did a series of road trip workshops internally for internal employees back in the fall of 2022. Gosh, my forgetting the year. I went to one in Chicago and set it on a full day of 2022 stuff. And they gave us an informational session about 2022, but also about how to deliver the workshop. So that's what I'm doing. I figured I'd break the workshop into sessions for our meetup, as well as deliver this to customers internally at Microsoft. I've done a mix of both. You'll want to go out to the workshop site. There's a GitHub site that I'll point you to here in just a second that has all this material on here. It even has this slide deck. These slides that you're looking at right now, they're incorporated into the main deck for the SQL 22 workshop that's out on GitHub. That's a lot of people say, hey, can I get a copy of the slides? GitHub, and I'll show you that here in a second. And then on here, there's things like demos, and there's Microsoft Mechanic videos, and there's a YouTube channel, and there's MS Learning Paths information, and there's blogs about new updates, things that they're doing. And it's a good way to, especially if you're looking through the Learn content and the Microsoft Mechanics piece, it's a good way to say, okay, I've got different sources for the material that they're talking about, and I'm able to put it together with different perspectives. So take a look at Data Exposed, take a look at Microsoft Mechanics, take a look at the blogs, take a look at the learning paths, and then try to ramp up. I'm going to shut my camera off because I talk with my hands. I make a big joke about that all the time, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, so goals for this workshop, again, we want to make it interactive. We want to make you curious enough at least to go out to the website to go and take a look at the labs, take a look at the lab setup, take a look at the instructions, take a look at the slide decks, the demos. And so you can walk away with that information to be a better colleague, be a better DBA or data developer, or have a better perspective on SQL 22. The meetup times and dates, again, this is all for 2023. Oh, yeah. So this is all for 2023. And again, we started back in February. We'll go through November. You're trying some sessions like when we did Connect to SQL or Connect SQL Server to Azure. That was a 2-month series of meetups. And then when we get into security, scalability, and availability, right there, we're adding nodes, we're doing different things with always on availability groups. We're doing things with Ledger. So we'll talk about those two pieces, or we'll talk about that over a couple of different meetups. For today, the intelligent query processing piece, it's just one meetup for that. And then we'll do one meetup for the data virtualization and object storage, and a single meetup for the application or enhancing our application with new T-SQL capabilities. We're basically breaking it up into a meetup or two meetups per suggested bullet in the lab. And then in November, we'll kind of recap everything and talk about next steps. And then I think in 2024, we'll have a new user group leader and a new agenda. And I don't know if the gentleman will want to do in person. I did tell, I told him, I said, hey, I want to hand this off or whatever. And he's, oh, we want to keep you around. And one thing I don't like doing is going to in-person meetups, not because of the people, but because I don't like to take in soda and water. I've done all that. I've gone by Office Depot to pick up name badges. I've purchased the clear plastic document holders to say, hey, please don't eat 8 pieces of pizza before everybody gets a chance to have a slice of pizza. Little stuff like that. So that's why I'm looking forward to not being just a participant of a couple of meetups. I had joined about, I have about 50 meetups that I'm a member of. I'm gonna peel those back to about two. Anyway, today we're going to talk about built-in query intelligence, and then you can see the rest of the meetups here over the next few months. Also, Prashant is running a new event, the Azure OpenAI and ChatGPT Bootcamp. We're doing that in the Microsoft Freedom Square office in Reston, in the Reston Town Center at 11955 Freedom Drive, Reston, in in the second floor, room C through E. It can fit about 120 people. It's going to be a single track event with about 5 or 6 sessions. I've gotten a couple people internally that might want to do lightning sessions. I'll ping those ideas off of Prashant, but I think it's going to be 5 to 6 sessions and maybe a lunch in between, something low frills, and I believe there might be some sponsors as well. So take a look out for that. You can register for that right now. I think it's a paid event, but the only reason it's a paid event is because what's the real victim here? If you have a no show, the real victim is the uneaten pizza. That poor uneaten pizza is going to sit in a box to be thrown away or taken to a shelter. Well, gosh darn it, we want that pizza eaten and consumed by people who were there to attend an event. So our reasoning is not to get, P. Diddy rich off of selling tickets to events, but it's to to give people an incentive to show up, right? If I bought movie tickets and the movie's coming up and I'm like, I don't want to go to the movie. Uh, I don't think that's ever happened. I always see every movie that I pay for. But that's what we're trying to get, right? If you pay for it, maybe they'll give you that extra incentive to get out of bed or to tell your coworkers that you're not going to be able to join them for Applebee's lunch, but instead you're going to an Azure OpenAI and ChatGPT bootcamp. So anyway, August 11th, Friday, August 11th, from 10 to 4, right? After traffic, morning rush hour, really there is no traffic. And then, we'll have you out of the building before the afternoon rush hour, except for Fridays, always a little bit earlier, right? People kind of take off. Also, for the resources and materials, I'll go there here in just a second. This session where we're going to record that and it'll be posted on YouTube. I'll go out there in just a second, as well as the workshop site. The workshop site is here. Oops, sorry about that. The workshop site is here. It's a GitHub site, and you can get basically the same content here as we're delivering, and the same kind of breakdown. There is a instructions on setting up your virtual machines, recommendations on the model of the virtual machines, recommendations on installing Management Studio and Azure Data Studio, and um, single click backup downloads for the different backups that you would download. Matter of fact, I would do these backups here because they tie into memory grant feedback, parameter sniffing, and degree of parallelism. They're backups that have data in them in a structure to where you can leverage that feature of something we're getting ready to talk about. There's OStress. It's part of the RML utility that'll simulate workload against your SQL instance, and then kind of a breakdown of how the workshop goes. And then you can go and look at the workshop itself and say, I just want the slide decks. Well, you can go and grab the slides from here. And these slides were updated 3 weeks ago. There might have been some new changes. I'm using a deck from February or April, so there's not been too many changes. But if you want the latest, go here and get the slide decks, and then the YouTube piece. Let me go here, YouTube, aka Azure Cloud Events. And you can see we've probably got we got a lot of content up there. There's a whole playlist on the SQL Server. Is it here? But you can see the additional videos that we've done. Session 1, 2, 3, 4. Oops, sorry. There's that bald guy again. But anyway, the website and the YouTube site, that's where our content's going. Um, and that's the best way for you to track things. Let me go back to the slide deck here. If you want more information, right, and if you want it from the author, you go grab this book, right? It's a first edition book. I got a copy of it on my Kindle. I use the Kindle web app, but SQL Server 22 revealed a hybrid data platform, the hybrid data platform powered by security, performance, and availability by Bob Ward, with a forward by the Microsoft um, VP for SQL Server, Ronan Kumar. So it's a really good book, and it gives you all kind of insights that are maybe included in the slides and sort of outside the scope of document, some history and some color around some of the content. So do take a look at the book too if you're interested in going deeper. The workshop itself, it's kind of we did a month on an introduction to SQL Server, and we did 2 months on connecting SQL Server to Azure, and we talked about connecting out to a managed instance node with an always-on availability group from SQL Server 22, which creates an availability group with a link from your SQL Server 22 instance to managed instance node. And we talked about linking SQL Server 22 to Synapse and leveraging Synapse, having Synapse leverage more analytical data from your transactional data that might be in your SQL Server. And we talked about Purview and policies, and we talked about Azure Active Directory and Microsoft Defender for connecting to Azure. We talked about Azure. Azure Arc Extension Agent, how it's similar to the IaaS agent extension, how it ties in. It adds new features. It allows you to see your SQL Server 22 box in your portal, Azure portal. Again, if you're going to set up your SQL Server 22 environment, follow these guidelines. You ideally you want to use there's a marketplace image out in Azure. You can just type in SQL Server 22 in the marketplace, and it'll have a pre-configured SQL Server 22 image installed already on a Windows Server 22 image. There's also support for Linux as well. And again, I won't, where SQL Server has come from 2016, 17, and 19, with the different things that have been baked in, the hybrid capabilities that were baked in with 2016 around um, uh, you know Polybase and being able to run faster, and SQL Server 2017 incorporating the ability to run on Linux, and SQL Server 2019 with data virtualization and accelerated database recovery and database classification. And then again, we're trying to cover the breadth of SQL Server needs wherever you are, right on the edge of your network, or maybe a pure PaaS service inside of Azure with the Azure SQL Database or Azure Edge. And SQL Server 22 has a role to play in this in terms of being able to provide database services in a secure and highly available and flexible manner, all being able to hit it with tools that you're familiar with and being flexible. And then with SQL Server 22, I know we've already seen this. It's still good to go over it. There are hero capabilities in SQL Server 22 that we talked about, uh, particularly the first three here. Link for managed instance, having a managed instance node, being able to serve as a failover node and an always-on availability group. Azure Synapse Link, where you can link your SQL Server to a Synapse architecture, to a Synapse a connection through landing zones, and to be able to drop off files and have those files snapped up by Azure Synapse and then assessed or read with tools like Power BI. And then Microsoft Purview, quick integration, both from information about what's running on your database, who owns the database, what's the schema of the database, what kind of data is in the database, but also to be able to put out policies in Purview, DevOps policies, and data access policies in Purview. Register your SQL Server 22 instance, much like your Azure SQL and Azure SQL Managed Instance or SQL Server workloads on Azure Virtual Machines. All these things can tie into Purview. You can enforce policies from Purview. And then security for SQL Server is something we're going to talk about next month. But today we're going to talk about built-in query intelligence and some of the new features of built-in query intelligence. And again, this is just kind of more of a marketing slide for the workshop. But again, we're going to talk about built-in query intelligence today uh, after we had talked about cloud connectivity over the past couple of months. Real quick, before we talk about uh, specifically built-in query intelligence for SQL Server 22, I do want to go back out to the website just to really quickly discuss intelligent query processing because, and I did want to show you this particular slide, not even a slide. I want to show you this diagram because the things in dark blue are the things that SQL Server 22 introduced. We'll talk about parameter sensitive plan optimization. We'll talk about optimized plan forcing. We'll talk about cardinality estimation and degree of parallelism, feedback persistence, and approximate percentile and percentile grant feedback. These things were introduced in SQL Server 22, but the road to intelligent query processing has been kind of traveling, really, you could say, since 2016 and beyond. So in 2017, you get adaptive query processing and adaptive joins. These are things that the query gets better based on the workload presented and makes the query run faster based on performance estimates or row estimates. There's batch modes and memory grant feedback. Then in SQL Server 2019, you get more of a, you get more things like table variable deferred compilation and batch mode for the row store and approximate query processing and scalar UDF inlining and approximate count distinct and um, memory grant feedback at the row mode, in addition to batch and percentile grant feedback that's been plugged in with 2017 and 2022. So with the intelligent query processing, what is it? Oh, sorry about that, guys. What is intelligent query processing, right? The main piece, right, is to do no harm. That's the main theory there. But to try to make your queries run faster, right? All this architecture is designed to improve performance of your workload in SQL Server without having to do a lot with, without having to do too much with trace flags, maybe turn the feature on and off for sure, or maybe have it leveraged simply because you have the query store on, or turn the query store on and it now starts to collect information. So these are important things. So you might want to take a look at the IQP. And again, if you want to know more about each one of these things, um, and again, it might tie into compatibility levels. For example, with your cardinality estimation feedback, starting in SQL Server 22 with compatibility 160, right? It's not just the upgrade to SQL Server that does it, but you also need to make sure your compatibility level is at SQL Server 22 or 160 level. So you get the cardinality estimation feedback, and it'll tell you these things that need to have the upgrade or what version of SQL plus the database compatibility for this to start working. So you'll definitely want to go out and review this article on Microsoft Learn. Just type in intelligent query processing in SQL databases. But I might flip back to that. No, I'm sorry. All right. So in terms of the query store and intelligent query pro, where does that fit in, right? You need a place that stores information, that logs information, that's graphically readable, that you can turn it on with minimal effort, that doesn't have an impact on your workloads, that's not expensive. So with SQL Server 22, the query store is on by default for new databases. And that's databases that are created on a SQL Server 22 instance that are not part of an upgrade from SQL 2017 or 2019 or 2016 where the query store is off. That's good. You can turn it on quite easily, but on by default for new databases on a SQL Server 22 instance. You have query store support now for read replicas from your availability groups. That does require a trace flag of 12606 that you run on the availability replica. And then the query store hints can help shape plans, right? With no code changes, no reworking of what you're having to do with your code. And then there's additional intelligent query processing capabilities that are enabled based on whatever scenario you're running, right? So the query store does have an immediate tie-in with your intelligent query processing, particularly for degree of parallelism feedback, really, to make sure that there's not too many or too little um, uh, parallel plans being generated for a query plan to run. And then cardinality estimation feedback. The row estimate is too high or too low, or the cardinality is being estimated too high or too low. Those are important. And then also parameter sensitive optimization plans. And then as part of the query store, again, you get hints. And also the query store has, when you talk about feedback, that feedback itself is stored in your query store in SQL Server 22. And then for your, hold on one second. And then for your next gen, we say next gen. There's sort of a Gen 1 and Gen 2 of this. Think about Gen 2 being SQL Server 22. Um, But really, if you just simply upgrade to SQL Server 22, you'll get approximate percentile and optimized plan forcing. And what approximate percentile does, both for percentile continued and percentile discovery, is the percentile continue really returns an approximate interpolated value from the set of values in a group based on a percentile value and sort specification. And that function can be used as an alternative um, uh, to percentile count for large data sets where negligible errors with faster response might be acceptable as compared to an accurate percentile value with slow response times. And then there's the approximate percentile disk, and that'll return the value from the set of values in a group based on the provided percentile and sort specification. And it could be used where you have large data sets where negligible errors with faster response is acceptable as compared to the opposite. And then you get optimized plan forcing. And again, that's part of IQP. And that reduces compilation overhead for repeating force queries and then requires the query store to be enabled and in read write mode. So it's really not a it's in read only mode if it's in a read replica and an always on or secondary replica and always on availability group. And then once that query execution plan gets generated, the specific compilation steps are stored for reuse as an optimization replay script, and then an optimization replay script is stored as part of the compressed show plan XML in the query store in a hidden optimization replay, no spaces in that attribute. And then if you're on SQL Server 22 plus you're at DB compat level 140, or the default value, the default compat for SQL Server 2017. So SQL Server 22 and DB compat 150, you get memory grant feedback percentiles and then memory grant feedback persistence. The percentile piece really is an improvement to that existing memory grant feedback rate. How much memory you're being given to run a query. Is it too much or too little? If it's too much, you could get resource semaphore errors. If you get too little, you could get spillover into the temp DB. So with percentile grant feedback, we can look back at the history of executions and then adjust grants based on a larger set of data points. And this feature enhances the benefits of memory grant feedback by allowing for less relearning of appropriate grants and preventing fluctuating grant requirements from blocking the benefit of the memory grant feedback. And then feedback persistence is an improvement to memory grant feedback feature. Um, the the um, the memory grant feedback data was stored only in the query plan cache. Thus, whenever the plan was evicted from cache, or in the case of a failover or a server restart, the system would have to relearn the memory grant feedback from scratch. With the feedback persistence, that relevant information is stored in the query store and can be retrieved at any time from disk with no concern for performance degradation after that cache eviction or a server restart, and that it absolutely improves the effectiveness of memory grant feedback. And then for a DB compat 160, so SQL Server 22 and DB compat 160, and DB compat 160 is the default compat for SQL Server 22. And with this, you get parameter sensitive plan optimization, cardinality estimation. And by the way, you can turn these features off or on. You can turn them off, turn them on or off at the database level, or turn them off or on at the query level. So you don't have to use them, but they're on if you need to use them. So parameter sensitive plan optimization, or PSPO, if you want to go that way, aims to improve the performance of parameterized queries, and that generates multiple execution plans for parameterized query, each optimized for a different range of values for parameters. What it doesn't mean is individual query plans for every individual that has a session on SQL Server or is running a stored procedure. No, no, no. It's more around generalized buckets and aggregations of queries and plans that aren't necessarily individualized. An example would be one set of plans uses an index seek as part of the stored procedure execution and the parameters that have been put in. And then another plan set might use index scan based on the parameters that have been put in for that stored procedure and the rows that it needs to traverse. And then cardinality estimation feedback. Um, this is really trying to address suboptimal query execution plans for repeating queries when these issues result from incorrect cardinality estimation model assumptions. And your cardinality estimation feedback uses historical data about a query's execution to decide if the query might receive help from one or more changes to the way it's compiled and executed. And that performance data is collected in the query store with various suggestions to improve execution. And then, yeah, and it also leverages things like query hints, and there's a little feedback loop. All of that's part of the query store. And in addition to parallel or parameter sensitive plan optimization and cardinality estimation feedback, there's also DOP, or degree of parallelism feedback. I always mess up on the L's. Parallel. I can say that all day. Parallelism. I have to listen to myself say it because I can really screw it up. Degree of parallelism feedback. It allows you to do some self-adjustment on the max degree of parallelism option to avoid performance problems due to parallelism in transactional queries that get performed repeatedly. And you get a feedback loop and the dynamic ability to adjust to make sure that you've got the right max DOP set. I think that Bob Ward mentioned on his YouTube video around this topic. He said he was able to, on some query plans or some instances, he's been able to adjust his maxed out from 16 down to. And again, what uses the query store, right? Everything that stores data, everything that's providing, historical storage and feedback is leveraging the query store. And then that ties in with other things that are part of the intelligent query processing family, or the adaptive joins, interleaved execution, the general memory grant feedback, before the improvements, table variable deferred compilation, batch mode on row store, scalar UDF inlining, approximate count distinct. I had to do a briefing on IQP for 2019. It's a pretty dry topic, I'll tell you that. And again, the principles: don't do any harm to your existing workloads. Don't do any harm to your existing query processing capability, and generally make it faster. And then you have options to disable any or all of this. Some query store enhancements. It's on by default for new databases. You can set it up for read replicas from for your availability group with trace flag 12606. You can use the hints, right, to shape plans without any code change, right? The hint will have the code that's being used for the hint. And then it's a great store for intelligent query processing because, right, we just saw where it leverages storage and provides a feedback mechanism for intelligent query processing features. And then your query store for your read replicas, again, trace flag 12606, but you have your primary replica, and you have your secondary replica. And your secondary replica, your read replica, is going to pull in your query store stats, and you can look at the query store from your read replica and get information about how your read replica is handling its read-only workloads. And you can look at your query store on your primary replica, and you can review information about how your read-write replica, your primary replica, is handling its workloads and handling the IQP piece. Again, minimal code changes with just upgrading to SQL Server 22. You're going to get approximate percentile, and you're going to get optimized plan forcing. And then again, with the optimized plan forcing, it's going to persist, compile steps for forced plan, and reduce that compilation overhead. And then with 140, you're going to get memory feedback percentiles and memory feedback persistence improvements to the memory grant piece. And then what is a memory grant itself? And this could be where you have a query that's running. Again, this is a standard select statement with an ordering by customer date and customer type. And you can see here you're doing maybe a table scan and then a cost of the sort, and it's telling you how much memory you're going to have to do to have that sort order stored. And then you might have the memory grant that gets executed before execution, and then that might be in variance with what's actually allocated during the actual execution. And you could get potentially, you could have a problem. You could have too much memory, and could get resource semaphore waits, because maybe too much memory has been allocated, or you could have too little memory based on the actual memories needed, and it could spill over into your temp DB, and you'll get IO completion waits, as well as the issues of spilling over into temp DB. And then memory grant feedback, what this is trying to do is to make sure that there is enough memory, an accurate amount of memory, to complete the query, right? What's allocated at the start of a query and what's estimated and allocated is actually more closely aligned, right? Between too much memory or too little memory. And again, with SQL Server 2017 and 2019, there's a first batch mode only and then row store. And then you can observe what was actually executed what was actually granted after an execution, and then you could do some adjustment, or it would do adjustments on the next execution if there was a grant that was incorrect. That came around in 2017 and 2019. And then the MGF percentiles and persistence. And again, what these are is, um, again, returns the percentile piece returns an approximate interpolated value from that set of values in a group based on the percentile value and sort specification. And then uh, persistence sort of stores that feedback in a query store. It's able to survive the planned cache eviction or a SQL Server restart. So you can save some potential performance impact from having that memory information, that memory grant information available in the query store. Hold on one second. And then again, this is, I know we've already seen this slide. Again, intelligent query processing, things you can get with just a flat out upgrade to SQL Server 22 without having to change any compatibility levels, approximate percentile, and optimized plan forcing. And then if you upgrade to 140, memory grant feedback percentiles and memory grant feedback persistence. And then if you upgrade not only to SQL Server 22, but if you also upgrade the compat to 160, you also get PSPO, cardinality estimation feedback, and dot feedback, all in your query store. Parameter sensitive optimization. Again, if you've got two users who are and this is really the kind of the problem, right? Two users, one user executes a query and it requires a scan. And that, it's not very many rows at all, and that's fine. But another person executes a query and it runs a scan, executes a store procedure and it runs a scan. And based on the number of rows that are involved in their query, you might start to get problems because it's sniffing out the plan with the parameter given to the store procedure. If you're using parameter sensitive plan optimization, instead of both users sharing this one plan, you have potentially multiple plans or multiple buckets, not individual. This slide's kind of misleading, right? It looks like an individual gets an individual plan because there's not a lot of bloat in the plan cache for this. Because of this, it's more around buckets and aggregates of plans that are stored in these buckets that would allow a user, myproc1, who might be leveraging an index seek for its plan, and then myproc10 might be leveraging scans in their query plans for their store procedure, and you get that PSP optimization to avoid the problems of having both users running a scan execution from myproc10. That might not be a problem, but it might be a problem if you're using myproc1. And then how does PSP optimization work? You get the parameterized query, and then the plan is kind of figured out based on the metrics of the plan, based on the variance of the plan, or the query variance, right? Less than 10K or in a middle range or over 1 million, based on what the row count is. You might be doing a certain cache plan that has a seek, a lookup, and maybe a small memory grant, or maybe a scan and a medium memory grant, or maybe it's a big old query and you're doing a scan and a large memory grant. But the main point is it's not per user on these plans. It's buckets and aggregates. You get a dispatcher plan and variant plans, and these buckets represent ranges of these rows that tie into these values. And it really is based on, one thing is pretty dependent on is correct statistics. So make sure you're monitoring your statistics in general, just good DBAs. But then variants have different query text, but the same query hash. We'll take a look at the one demo that I have is on parameter sniffing. Is parameter sniffing gone? Only really operated supported. There's a finite limit of variance, so really no, it's not completely gone. You could have there is a conservative ratio for minimum and maximum cardinality, and you could get a plan that might not be best for all the parameter values within those variant buckets. And then multiple parameters are absolutely supported. Then you get new query store DMVs are required to examine stored products. And then um, you might potentially have, um, with using DMVs for plain cache around, uh, maybe you do a DMV against the planned cache and it runs poorly, the DMV itself potentially. And then if you use existing hints or trace flag, or won't use if you use existing hints or trace flag, right? It won't use that um, uh, PSP parameter sniffing plan. All right, so let's do real quick. Let me walk you through a real quick pre-recorded demo here on parameter sniffing. So we've got here a query, SQL Server 22 database. Worldwide Importers database, which is a downloadable backup right off the website. You're going to get items, a stock item supplier by supplier ID, just creating a store procedure here. See if I can make sure I talk it through. And then we've got two query plans. You got one that is going to take a long time and one that is going to do, they're going to do two different things, right? One's for an index seek and one's for an index scan. And then you're going to run this. And this only returns 3 rows, and then it's going to return this index seek. And you can tell it takes 37 milliseconds. So that did an index seek. And then the second query here, we're passing it a different value. It's going to do an index scan. And it's going to return more than 3 rows, that's for sure. And we'll show you this. It's taking a little bit of time, and it's returning 3 million rows. It's doing an index scan. And then now we're going to run this plan again, and now this is doing an index scan. And you can see it's taking a lot longer, right? Because it sniffed out the plan that this query 56 is running, right? And it goes from 37 milliseconds to 330 milliseconds. And if you take a look at the perfmon here, you got batch requests per second and processor time. The batch requests, while this will go fairly high for the O-stress utility, we've got the index seek piece and then index scan. So for the index seek, we're going to run this for a little bit, and we see that our batch requests are high, and that's completely fine. But CPU is relatively quiet. And then for index scan, batch requests with the index scan, hold on one second. Let's go take a look. Again, that takes just not too long. This takes about 2 milliseconds for 6 milliseconds. So notice here, we've got our workload capability has gone down dramatically, but our processor has spiked for the index scan. We're doing a lot more work and getting a lot less value out of it, right? Our resources are really getting pegged with this parameter sniffing plan. Sorry, but it's because the query's using the scan plan. And again, this row is coming back with 3 rows. And then this that other query, the supplier ID, pulls back 3 million rows. So supplier ID of 2 pulls back 3 rows. Supplier ID of 4 pulls back 3 million rows. Again, here we've got the compatibility level at 160 and set the query store on. So now we're going to run this again. This is pre-query store. This is post PSP being turned on. Runs very quickly. And again, 2 point, basically 02 milliseconds. And the scan is going to run 06 milliseconds. Same thing. So again, we get the very high level of work and the very low use of resources with PSP optimization on and the database compatibility level set at 160. And then again, you get a couple of query plans. You get one for the seek and one for the scan. Index scan, and then you see you have a plan here for index seek based on what is in the plan cache and what plans are being used per query based on the query itself. It just knows rather than a single plan being used. And then you can say here's some DMVs or some querying of some system tables, or you can take a look at the variant buckets where these different queries are being stored or different plans being stored and different variants. Object IDs are the same, but the variants are different. Predicate range is different because, right, you're going from supplier ID of 2 to supplier ID of 4. Query hashes are the same, but the display and also the query plan hash is going to be different. And you can take a look at XML execution plan in XML, and you can take a look at the variant buckets in there as well. And there's the stored procedure, and there's the dispatcher bucket where it's dispatching the stored procedure and parameters based on the workload and all that good stuff to the right variant bucket. All right. 1 second. Let me get back. So that was parameter sniffing. You can see with parameter sniffing, if it's if it's if it's turned on, if you've got everything running, that you're going to use less resources even though your workload's going up. That's the key thing, right? Do no harm. Cardinality estimation. Uh, Hold on 1 second. Cardinality estimation. Go here. So with cardinality estimation, what you're trying to think about here is if you've got your, you know, if you're using that historical data about how your queries are running, you're trying to tell the query engine how to execute and decide if the right query might help from one or more changes to the way it gets compiled and executed. And that performance data is collected in your query store with various suggestions on how to improve the query execution. Um, and again, with there's a legacy CA model where you have DB compats of 120, and then a new compat CE model over DB compat levels 120. If you're wondering about DB compat levels, just on the top of your head, you can go here and go here and take a look, right? DB compatibility level SQL Server 2014 is 120, and then SQL Server 2016, 130, SQL Server 2017, 140, Azure SQL Database 150, SQL Server 2019, 150, SQL Server 22, 160. Yeah, it's a good way to just keep your memory jogged about what those compatibility levels are. And again, these changes are based on maybe there needs to be improvements to cardinality estimation, and then customers didn't really upgrade, or they didn't use the change from their compatibility levels once they migrated their databases to another instance or upgraded the instance. And there's some of these workarounds could be, the negative side, don't change your compatibility level. Yuck. Maybe trace flags to get around some of these aspects, or maybe you could do some kind of cardinality estimation configuration at the database level, or query hints. And then you could see maybe, let me just build the slide out. With an example of a problem in your cardinality estimation where you're doing a select, from your person.address table, and you can see, full independence, legacy model hint, or trace flag. I mean, you're trying to see if there's potentially any issue going on between the city itself and then the state province ID. And then the cardinality estimation feedback, well, how this works, the analyzer will take a look at your query patterns. It'll, if again, it's using the query store, the query store will offer a hint. It'll validate to see if there's been any improvements. And then if it has improved, it'll persist that hint in your query store. And then your query store hint will take over on the subsequent executions of the queries. And if you're using a forced plan, it won't use your cardinality estimation or your query hint, and they'll follow the rules of the hint. So over time, it'll evaluate the best plan. So if it'll take the hint, or if you're using a forced plan, it'll also evaluate whether or not that's improving. And then max degree of parallelism, right? That's always a bit of a pain, setting the right level of max. Sorry about that. We're setting max DOP up. I've seen, standard recommendations, leave max DOP at 8 on a 16 CPU machine or 16 core machine. But anyway, setting the max DOP is always a pain. More DOP, more threads, more CPU, less DOP, less threads, less CPU. And then, you want to have the lowest degree of parallelism to achieve the same query duration. That's the mother load. That's right, where you're getting quicker queries but lower DOP, right? You're telling the processor to work less. And you see the architecture of degree of parallelism. You see the query itself going to the query processor, leveraging degree of parallelism feedback from the query store going into the query processor itself, and then query stats kind of going in and feeding information about what's running in the background. Eligible for DOP feedback? Did it provide DOP feedback? Did it validate? Is it stable? Do we need to revert the feedback based on a performance issue where the query store is telling us that there is a performance degradation versus a performance improvement? And again, the DOP feedback details: eligible queries need to have a longer duration and repetitive, need to be repeatedly run. All about lowering overall CPU and usage of a query, less CPU for a DOP query, more CPU for everyone else. Start from max dot precedence and setting, and then lower. Ideally, you don't go higher, you know, um, ideally, but I've seen some companies go from 8 to 16 based on certain settings. I've seen articles where there's a standard max stop and thing, never set it at 0 because it goes into parallelism like crazy. Factor out common weights like your CPX or CX packet weight. Focus on your CPU performance, and then take a look at your max dot feedback when you're doing recompiles. So, quick knowledge check: query store is on by default. Under which circumstances, right? When you create a new database with SSMS and SQL Server 22, and when you do the create database statement in SQL Server 22. Parameter sensitive plan optimization can help in which scenario, right? In scenarios where there's more than one plan in cache, which could help with store procedure performance. Cardinality estimation feedback works by, right? It persists the query store hint for queries that improve in performance. And then parallel efficiency is defined as the lowest degree of parallelism. Ha, I did it. I knew I would do it. I added an extra L. The lowest DOP setting for a query to achieve similar duration across executions while keeping CPU. Ideally, you want to keep your CPU low enough to where it can handle other tasks. All right, guys, real quick, I'll leave you with Query Store is on by default for your new databases for SQL Server 22. It provides hints and works with replicas, a good store for your IQP um, components. Upgrade to SQL Server 22 with any DB compat and get approximate percentile and optimized plan forcing. Upgrade and use DB compat 140 to enable memory grant and percentiles feedback. Upgrade and use DB compat 160 if you want to start with parameter sensitive plan optimization, CE feedback, and DOP feedback. And then do take a look, go Google IQP for Gen 1 and 2 and and take a look at what came out in 150 and or 140 and 150. All right, guys. Do we have any questions before we pause for the day? Hearing none. Hold on one second. All right. I hope everybody has. I don't know if you're taking the day off on July 3rd to enjoy a 4th or taking off July 5th. I got to work July 3rd and I got to work July 5th and I got to work July 6th. Poor me. But anyway, if there's no questions, I'll have this recording posted up. Let me see if there's a question. Okay, no problem. If there's no questions, I'll have this recording posted up in about an hour. And you guys go and have a good weekend. I'll turn my camera on. I think you can see my bloodthirsty dog. Oh no, there she's down here. You can't see her. Lily. Lily. There's my dog. Anyway, she's getting ready to get I'm going to take her for a WALK, which I think she can spell. I think she knows. I think she knows what that is. Anyway, thanks everybody. Bye bye. Stop recording.